Hey, it's Greg Torres. I'm in my hometown, Westfield, New York, and I'm going to show you one of my favorite places, mostly because of the trees, but there's another plant here I wanted to show off too. It's a nice row of maple trees, sugar maples. They're tapped almost every year. You can even see some old horticultural techniques here of packing the trees with bricks to give them additional support. Whether it works or not, I don't know, but these trees are magnificent and quite old. And so we're walking up to this beautiful black cherry tree. But as you can see, it's full of foliage all the way around at the base here. These branches that are in full bloom. And as you approach, you can actually hear a number of bees buzzing away, working over these flowers. It's kind of pretty. Though a lot of people might already recognize this plant. The leaves of 3 that you should let be. This is poison ivy. It's in full bloom right now, all the way up this tree. It's in the Anacardiaceae family of plants, so it's in the cashew family. It's related to mangoes, sumac, which is blooming right now also. Smoke bush, also blooming right now in June. It has a lot of variation in the leaves and in the habit of the plant. As I said, you can see it down here on the ground. I've seen it as like a 3-high shrub form, and of course this with several foot-long branches coming off of the trunk of this tree. As you can see, you got the leaves, the leaflets of 3 coming off the leaves. The leaves are alternating on the branch, not opposite of one another. That's a very important indicator. And a lot of times you'll hear people talk about the teeth on the leaves or them looking like a mitten or something. You can see here that that's not the case. The leaf form of poison ivy is highly variable, so you need to look for other indicators on this plant if you're going to properly identify it. It can look like a lot of different things. You have branches coming off, and coming from the axils, the corners of the stems where the leaves come out are a whole bunch of flowers, lots of flowers. If you get under here, you can really start to see how many flowers there are. I don't know if it's audible, but there's a lot of insects using this plant right now. The tips of the branches the leaves have been removed. And looking at the damage, the way it's kind of stripped off, this looks like deer damage. Deer will eat the leaves of poison ivy. So we have insects using the flowers. We have deer that eat the leaves. Later in the season, these flowers will become white berries. And if the number of the flowers are any indicator, this will be loaded up with berries. It's really important for our birds because these berries will ripen up in the fall, and into the winter they'll persist. A lot of birds will either stay here and use these berries through the winter, or they'll fatten up to make their migration. So the poison ivy flowers have been blooming for a few days now. I've been visiting this plant while I've been visiting my family here in New York, and what I've noticed is that they are completely stripped of their pollen from the flowers of yesterday. You don't see any yellow pollen on there. The anthers are empty and they're spent flowers. But just coming down the stem a little bit more, you can see here on the leading edge of this flower cluster, there's still a lot of pollen. Now it's early in the morning, and my suspicion is if I was to come here in the evening, a lot of these anthers would be stripped clean of their pollen, and hopefully these flowers pollinated, but definitely the bees, bumblebees, honeybees I've seen on here too, will have gathered this pollen to use to raise their young. So again, this is poison ivy, but it's only really toxic to human beings. We have an allergic reaction to it, and most other animals can tolerate this plant quite well, and it's an important plant for many creatures in our ecosystem. Insects, mammals, and birds alike. So this is a huge example of poison ivy. I'm not going to get into all the details about it because I have created a podcast on Nature Guys specifically on this plant, which I will link in the description below. So check that out. There's a lot more details about the plant that you can learn if you're interested. But this is poison ivy. It's a fine example of it. It's absolutely enormous, and it's dominating everything from the ground here all the way up the branches or the trunk of this tree, and literally seems like the branches of the tree. We'll just take a spin around this whole thing so you can see how magnificent of a example plant this is. I just pity the guy who has to mow the grass around it. I'm not even certain they're aware of this plant. It's a massive, massive display. This is poison ivy. Toxicodendron radicans.